Symposium. So we have 4 talks instead of the 3 originally planned, and we're already a bit late. So I'll unfortunately have to be a bit more strict on the time and on the discussion, but I still hope we can have some good conversation and discussion. So our first speaker for this session is one of the historians in the room, Izdebski, from the Max-Planck-Institut for Geoanthropologie in Jena. So without further ado, Adam, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much for the invitation and for a very interesting workshop, for all the talks. Perhaps first a few words of introduction, referring to Peter's talk at the very beginning, when he made a distinction between historical ecologists and environmental historians. I am more of an environmental historian. So I do not study, I'm not interested in biodiversity for the sake of conservation. Although, of course, it's also interesting, and coming here, I was thinking about how the historical data that we use could be deployed for this purpose, and there will be a small excursus in the middle of the talk about that. I'm more thinking about how we got into the mess that we are in currently, so about the historical mechanisms that brought us into the planetary crisis and how we could use this knowledge to get out of it, or at least facilitate, make our situation a little bit better. And as an environmental historian, so by education I'm an ancient historian, so Greece and Rome, and I still love reading these texts. But I now work on and the group I lead together with Alessia Masi from Rome works on the entire late Holocene in Europe and the Mediterranean. And we look both at moments of accelerations, so huge increase in human impact, in market integration, basically in something comparable to the Great Acceleration, but on a different spatial scale, and also major stressors, climate extremes, droughts, like longer-term climate trends, epidemics. So we look a lot into the mechanisms of resilience. Before I move on to the talk itself, it's a work of many people. In summer, I would say that this study is possible is we owe it to 4 or 5 generations of historians, really 100 years of historical research that produce different types of data that we pull together to carry out our analysis. So what I present here is one of such moments of acceleration in the history of Europe. This is the rise of capitalism. So you see here La Méditerranée by Fernand Braudel, and his other books also are focused on this time period of the 15th and 16th century when Europe experienced something that could be understood as a phase transition in terms of the institutional integration, accumulation of capital, and the impact on the natural environment. So we have political consolidation, so for instance the Ottoman, Turkish and Spanish empires, the North Sea Baltic trade entering a new phase, increasing fiscal pressure, so the building of all these institutions which in very extreme form we have today, compared to how they were in this time period. We have new wave of economic integration after the hiatus of the late medieval crisis, which this time included also Eastern Europe very strongly. We have massive demographic growth at the turn of these 2 centuries, really, and in some way still surprising to historical demographers. Commodification and monetization of agriculture, to a large extent in response to the fiscal pressure of the state, and the development of financial institutions and investments. So it's really some kind of early capitalist, continental scale Anthropocene acceleration. And the 2 case studies that I'm bringing with me today are examples of how the human ecological niche was changing in these conditions. So the way local communities at the scale of micro-regions, how they were changing their interaction with the natural and with the environment around them, in response to all these processes. So this is more or less what I am interested in, and there will be one case study from Greece and one case study that combines material from Greece and Poland. So case study 1, changing causal factors in human niche construction in the early Peloponnese. So what we are doing, you might have noticed the convoluted title, which included causal analysis and machine learning. So we are pulling together a lot of data in order to apply quite complex mathematical Bayesian algorithm to figure out causal connections between different phenomena. So it's like a whole process of research that we actually repeated several times. This is why there is this arrow going back. So we pull together the data, we analyze, we have the results, and oh, we are missing something. Oh, we should do it differently, yes? So we started with this hypothesis that I described, and there is the preparation of the data. We analyze how the variables are correlated, so how different phenomena might be actually dependent on each other. Then we develop causal model. Then we run the algorithm itself that was developed by a physicist and archaeologist in our institute in Vienna. Then we interpret the results. So it's like a whole long process, and it's been taking us 3 years to arrive to this point. So in the case of the first case study, the research question is to look into the causal factors determining ecological niche construction strategy of peasants who were going through this process of early capitalist market integration within the multi-continental Mediterranean trade system. So we are looking at just one small area, small region, the Peloponnese in Greece, and in fact just its northwestern part, to verify the hypothesis that with time, economic factors overtook cultural and environmental as capitalism expanded under the conditions of peace. And in this case, we are not really using any paleoscientific data. So we are using it in the second case study. Here we rely on the historical data. This is also why I wanted to present it to you. The original documents, they look like that, written in Ottoman language and Arabic script. The historical data, these are Ottoman taxation cadastres, so basically books about registering what taxes every peasant family was supposed to pay. They're called tahrir defterleri in Ottoman Turkish. So records of taxes paid by rural and urban population. The information is at the family level. The data is on cultivation, affluence, on how rich the people were, and the number of people. I mean, it's the number of households. You still can have a big debate, what is the coefficient that you should use to make it into population numbers, of course, so how many people per family and so on. And we have 3 cadastres in this area. For most of the Ottoman Empire, we have usually 3 cadastres. So we have one from around the middle of the 15th century, and we have usually one from the first half, one from the second half of the 16th century, and then the Ottoman administration gave up on this massive effort of collecting this data and bringing it to Constantinople, to Istanbul. And in the first of these cadastres, and only in the Peloponnese, ethnicity is recorded, Albanian versus Greek, because the Albanians had a tax reduction. So this information was important for the tax collectors, and this is why we know which villages were Albanian and which were Greek. And this is one of important factors that we analyze. We also bring into our causal model modern geographical data, altitude, slope, seasonal climate data. So for every village that we analyze, temperature, precipitation, sunshine, soils, distance to the nearest river or stream, and access, it's Euclidean distance in our model, to historic harbors and market towns. So access to markets, basically. We work on the northwestern Peloponnese, so really a tiny region compared to the entire Mediterranean. And this geographical selection is based on the fact that only the pages relevant describing this part of the Peloponnese from the first cadastre have survived. The rest was destroyed in 1920s. And also, It's huge effort. So one cadaster is one PhD thesis, yes? So the first one is published by the postdoc in my group. This was his PhD thesis that took him 5 years or so. It's a published book. The other two cadasters we just read, transcribed, extracted the information that we need, and we don't put the effort into publishing them. It's like, and it was another postdoc working for 2 years only on transcribing this Arabic Ottoman script and then transcribing it into, and then extracting the information on cultivation and population. And what is important is that the Albanian communities at that point, they were relative newcomers. They were settled in the Peloponnese by Byzantine and Venetian, so pre-Turkish authorities, in the later Middle Ages, after the Black Death, when there was huge population collapse in Greece. And this was an attempt to repopulate the landscape. But they were semi-nomadic people, so they were bringing from the Central Balkans a different land use, a different way of interacting with the environment. So this is why we included this cultural parameter variable, which is just categorical, Albanian or Greek, in our model. So this is how the model looks like, different aspects of the environment, culture, and economy, and we had to choose a single variable from very rich data that we have from each cadaster. So for this niche construction strategy, we decided to go for preference for mixed agriculture, which we operate, like which in our model is represented by the percentage of vineyard tax paid by each village. So how much how important is vine cultivation in what they do, basically. And we have our hypothesis. Yes, we have the hypothesis that Greek villages would have more vine cultivation because they are longer settled, yes? So they could have developed that, and this is the traditional way of agriculture in the Peloponnese in the medieval times. We also hypothesized that distance to, that for instance, richer villages would have more vineyards because this is a bigger investment and you have to have the resources to do it. We expect that the higher you go, you would have more vineyards and so on. So there is a number of variables that we put into the algorithm, and what the algorithm does, and just a comment, some variables we didn't even put into the algorithm because of very strong correlations. So basically this whole conglomerate is really represented by altitude in our model. And what the algorithm does, it's an R package with user-friendly interface. It's important because this way I can use it without bothering my friend physicist, that implements an algorithm for systematic model comparison. So basically you input the variables and it looks at all possible regression models and chooses the best ones, like a ranking of them. And also, not only it selects the 8 best models and compares them according to different parameters, but it also produces a global variable ranking of the variables that you put into the algorithm based on all the models. So this also gives you some idea of, let's say, the global importance of the variables. There are some aspects that I will not discuss for the reasons of time that make this algorithm particularly useful for historical analysis. So it's really developed with the idea that it's for historical projects, historical or archaeological actually. Yes, so this is how it looks. I put different colors to represent different variables, different also types of phenomena. These are the different global variable importance rankings. So this is based on all the possible models. And we already see that there is a change. For instance, altitude becomes more important, both square and linear, because you can have up to cubic relationships. Yes, you can have linear, square. I only take up to square. It's enough of complexity to understand once you have the results. And you can also have interactions between variables. So for instance, I mean, you can make interaction of all variables, but then you have so much results that you cannot really make sense of it. So we decided to hypothesize which variables should actually interact, and we are only checking the interaction of population number and the average tax, so how rich a village is, to represent sort of investment capacity of a village. And apparently, as the time moved on, this became the most important variable. You also have specific formulas, and you can use, for instance, the Bayesian information criterion or R-square to select the model you want to look at. And for each model, you have also variable importance. This is standardized parameter in the regression analysis. And you have the estimate of the parameters with credibility interval and so on. So just to give you the idea of what happened during that time, based on our analysis, this is, first of all, it shows the R-square, so the color area is the R-square, so it's 0.58, I think, here, and 0.38 here, so it's high, yes, but it's decreasing with time, so there is apparently either more noise or some phenomena, some causal phenomena that we are not catching. And we put so much effort already to catch different causal drivers that I think we give up here. We are already quite satisfied. And the colors represent the standardized parameter, yes, the importance of variables within the model. So we see a very big change between the first cadaster and the two other cadasters. This is great news for us because there is big debate whether this historical source is reflecting reality. And I would say, not going into the detail, if it shows a change, it must reflect some change, yes? So there must be reality that is underlying that. And we see this change from the choice, like let's say the cultivation strategy, the niche construction strategy of a village being dominated by ethnicity, so different strategy of Albanians and the Greeks, to being dominated by investment capacity and altitude. So both how much we can, like what are our investment potential, how much we can actually put in to get out of the environment, and what is the actual potential of the environment. And here also in this one, it's interesting, we have the harbor distance. And actually it's interesting because it's positive. It would suggest that the farther from the harbor, the more vineyard cultivation you have. And it makes a lot of sense because, let's say, the same a kilogram of wine and a kilogram of grain had a different price. So transporting wine, you could have transported much more money, yes, if you had, and all villagers had to get money to pay taxes, yes, so they're under pressure to get integrated into the market economy that was rising at that time. And this puts it in historical context, so just to show what historians can get also for the, from let's say 1200, price series that we have here. So this is a grain price in Florence. Up until the Battle of Lepanto, it's very closely correlated with the Istanbul series, which starts somewhere here. So it gives an idea of the price movement in the Mediterranean. We have also the wine prices, and you see that they are rising. After 1450, there are, of course, different cycles and so on. There is also the increase in population numbers that was huge between the middle of the 15th and the early 16th century. So this major transition, this is not only market integration, but also huge increase by some 50% within 2 generations of 3 generations in population numbers. Perhaps less, perhaps the first source is not recording so well, but anyway, we have huge demographic growth. So we have this, to tell the story to the end, Black Death demographic collapse, Albanians settle in the Peloponnese, incessant warfare, and nothing really changed. This is how you would expect it to be when they settle. Several generations later, then we have the Mediterranean demographic revolution and things change. And then we have further market consolidation. So we have crystallization of the new model. You can also look at how the parameter is reacting to the values of your independent variables. So like how how you predict based on just one independent variable, so one causal driver. So just to give you perhaps this example, this is a combination of positive linear and negative square term, like parameters, with the altitude, and you see that the highest, let's say, premium, yes, for altitude, you get for the middle range of the variable. Yes, and it makes a lot of sense when you think in terms of both climate, microclimatic conditions of each place, but also in terms of soils, that at these altitudes, you have the soils that are better for vine cultivation than for cereal cultivation. Yes, so perhaps I will not go in all this detail to save time. Our initial hypothesis was more or less confirmed, and we are quite satisfied with the results. And now, I didn't check when I started. How much time I have? Okay. So perhaps this is even more important than the second case study for our discussions here. So it's the excursus on how we can use the type of sources that we use for this case study for reconstructing, approximating, estimating past biodiversity. So what we are using, we would term it as mass administrative sources. And there are many, many different types of them, yes? They have been mentioned in different ways already during this workshop. They were produced usually for, administrative sources were produced for management purposes by state or by the owner of an estate. They contain descriptive, both descriptive and numerical information. Usually they can be quantified and georeferenced. And of course, biased to reflect the purpose of the creator. And I think this is very important always to consider. And there are, when you think about mass sources, that you would have two major types, tax or cadastral versus estate inventories. And this is how they look like. This is one example from Poland from the from an estate inventory, late 16th century, and this is how you have already seen an Ottoman taxation record looks like. The difference between the two is quite important, yes, because cadasters usually it's actually the other way round. So no, sorry. Yes, there is some mix-up of this up here. So let's start with the inventories. They always have the micro level. They describe a specific estate, a specific place, but they are very detailed. They contain management-related information, so a lot about sowing, manuring, after crops, forests. They lack continuity. This is very important, yes? This is like one snapshot on one place, and that's it. And they often also lack uniformity. So this is a big challenge in creating databases. In Poland, for instance, the earliest ones date to the 15th century, and like this date would be different in different parts of Europe, depending on a variety of factors. Cadasters cover entire administrative units, like the size of the Peloponnese, for instance. They are detailed, depends on the purpose, and this change over time in Europe. There is a historical development. So up to 1600, they would contain information on cultivation and non-agricultural activities. So this was kind of the first wave of the state, of the fiscal state's effort to write down everything and, you know, catch everyone to pay their taxes, so this would be extremely detailed, and for this reason quite useful. From the 17th century, you have a long phase when this would be dominated by very simple taxes. The state kind of was giving up on being so detailed, but it's still extracting a lot of money. And the 18th century sees a modernization of this process with detailed land cadasters. So like the Josephine cadaster that Dominic was talking about yesterday. And it has very different coverage across Europe. So some would appear later in one place, later in another, and it's very heterogeneous. And just to give you an impression how what you can get, this is a 16th century Ottoman cadaster. You have geographic data, you have demographic data, the number of households, bachelors, and you have all this financial data. that you see here. And in our database from Ottoman cadastres from the 15th and 16th century, we have 334 different taxes, yes, on everything you can imagine, on any productive activity. And I think, I mean, this was just our brainstorming with Jorgo, the senior postdoc coordinating this stuff before this workshop. What can we bring here, yes? This database already exists for Greece. It's finished for parts of Greece. And probably this could be detailed enough information to actually say something about the biodiversity. So to make, it's not like Relaciones, which seems unique and fascinating, but still it's quite detailed. Okay, I think I finish here. I don't need to bring up, the second case study involves also pollen data, but there has been a lot about that, and I think I finish here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam. Do we have questions? Graciela?
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to listen to historians. I learned so much. In your first case, you were somehow coupling different sources of information, and you were mentioning environment, and those were like altitude and things like that. But what about any climate reconstruction? Because I think that would have influenced the
any
price.
What? Sorry?
Climate reconstructions, or even actual records, if any.
Yes. So
there is a twofold. Just to give some context,
yes,
Adam, this is because I'm sure that would have influenced the price of wheat and wine during the Little Ice Age that you are actually covering.
So what we are interested in, so we don't take prices. We show the price, it's kind of illustration of the integration dynamics and the market pressure, yes? It's not in the model. In the model, we are interested in differences between villages. So the model is like we do 3 separate experiments in the sense for each cadastre for 1460s, 1510s, and 1580s. And in each case, we are trying to explain the choices made by villagers. So what we are interested in is making, like, catching as much difference between villages as possible in different phenomena to explain the choices of the villagers. Which means that we are not necessarily interested how climate change over time if the modern day microclimate diversity in the northwest of the Peloponnese remained relatively stable. And I discussed that with climatologists from Greece, and they said, yes, like this small area is, like the climate is determined by mechanisms that would be relatively uniform over this area. We also look like the Old World Drought Atlas is of course not perfect, but we like, and it has only 4 spatial fields for the Peloponnese, but only the southeastern field shows a slightly different trajectory during this time compared to the other fields. So I think that the modern data still are capable enough, and the fact that they work for these cadastres, yes, for explaining choices made 400 years ago, yes, that they are good enough to reflect the differences between the diversity among villages, because this is what we need to get into this experiment.
Have Miguel and then Peter.
Prices we use in the second case study, but it's different. It's a different setup.
Hi, Adam. It's wonderful talk. Thank you very much. One quick question: is there information on forestry or fisheries for in the cadastres?
I mean, there would be information on. I mean, it's a very specialized question, so I should put you in touch with Jorgo. Oh. I don't remember these 334 taxes. I think that it's very much focused on what produces wealth, yes? So as far as I remember, you would get like pasturing activities and activities in the forest, but they would not, in this case, like in estate inventories from Poland, and you don't have such estate inventories for the Ottoman world, you would have descriptions of forest, yes, and how they were using it. Here you would get some taxes, I don't know, for having pigs in the forest or something like that. Yes, and I don't think, I mean, I cannot tell about fisheries. It's really a question to Jorgo, so I can write it down and ask him.
Right.
I can even ask him on WhatsApp.
I'm sure they pay taxes for that also, but then I understood that you focus a lot on wine production, but from the information you showed, it seems that you really have a quite nice set of products for paying taxes. So there is a nice room, I think, for a multivariate analysis of describing gradients of variation of different crops and so on.
Yes, so this database is more or less finished, but nothing is published yet. So we are planning a data paper in which we would do it. And here, of course, we could, you have to select in this algorithm, there is another one, but it's not finished yet, when you can have a hierarchy of dependent variables and independent variables, so it's like Bayesian networks. In this one, you have to choose one dependent variable, yes? So we had to choose the one that seems to best differentiate villages and represent different strategy of using the natural, the environment, basically, of constructing the human niche.
Sorry, I'm gonna have to make a choice now.
Thank you. Miguel already kind of asked my question, but I know the dev tests because they exist for Hungary, and maybe you should use them because they're all published. But back then, when I was young, I had a good long look at them for trees that I was interested in, and they don't do trees, at least where I come from, because that's not a taxable unit.
Exactly.
And so that was my question. So if you're going to look at biodiversity, how will you do that with these defters? Because they focus on agricultural production, taxable agricultural production.
Yes, so it's more of a question to people in this room, what they are interested in, because we are not using it then to reconstruct biodiversity. We did this database because we are interested how these society, the local societies of Peloponnese and Macedonia, reacted to the rhythm of epidemics, to basically to understand the dynamics of the social-ecological system, yes, over, let's say, the time scale of 500 years. For the north of Greece, we also have a similar but not the same database from Byzantine monastic documents from Mount Athos. So, we created it for one purpose, but what we tried to do was actually not to create, and this is often the problem with historical databases. They are created with a specific research question in mind. And it's very difficult to use them for a different purpose. What we did here, this was a congenial idea of Jorgo. Let's just build a digital version of what the Ottoman administration had and make it searchable. So what we did is basically, if they had the technology we have today, so Access and GIS and QGIS, this is how they would do the defters. So we try to stay as close to the source as possible, but still we are able to generate whatever numerical or spatial information we want, which means that you can come and you say, I'm interested, I don't know, in flax cultivation, in mulberry trees, in some type of pastoral activities, and you will get it. Yes, so I think it's more we can get an idea from the human side, what humans were doing with the environment, and then we can think, of course, there is pollen data. The whole concept is that we also have from each of these two microregions high-resolution pollen records that were done in our group or already existed. So you have pollen data with which you can compare that. So there is very data-rich area, and you can come with different questions to that. But I think it really depends, it's not probably the data with which you can reconstruct the baseline. It's more data with which you can think how these different mechanisms, and this is really what interests me, yes? Market integration, what is the impact of market integration and epidemics at the same time, and some climate stress at the same time on biodiversity. This is what I want to understand. So it's enough to get the trend and not to get the exact information on some species.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. And we'll move to...